My friends, nice to see you all by the rivers of Babylon, wherever you all are. Greetings from Jerusalem, from Zion. It is the season of weeping for Zion. Not just the front page news, unfortunately, but the days on the calendar on which we remember Zion. And as I shared in my emails, and as many of you probably know and perhaps observe, we are just days ahead, away from the 9th of Av, in the middle of the 9 days on the Jewish calendar, that each year recall the tragedies that befell our ancestors. Um, I can't make my sound much louder, Renee. I'm sorry. I'm at my top volume, so please turn the volume top on yours, and we'll do the best we can. The 9 days are on the Jewish calendar. Since my childhood, there were days of memory, but some cliche, perhaps, not taken very seriously. But I would say that in the last years, especially with all the political heartaches of these last almost 3 years, these days of destruction and lament are ever more pertinent and painful, because they're not only about what happened before, but they're about what is happening right now. They're about the ways discord and civil discord led to civil war. And it's an opportunity for reckoning, for moral reckoning. How did we and how are we doing when it comes to keeping our home safe? And what happens when we don't? So there are many dimensions to these days of woe and days of lament, and they are observed in different ways here in Jerusalem, in Israel, all over the world by people of different religious observance. And on our journey here, below the Bible Belt, observing these days and asking the questions of Judaism's birth divided, the question of the stories of the destruction, both the destruction of Jerusalem, that is the one that is marked at this point in time, and the destruction of Samaria, that is part of our history that is not recorded on our calendars, are two, really three, but two main destruction stories that I wanted to bring to us today. This is the seventh of our 12 explorations throughout the year of the historical stories of Judah and Israel, Northern Kingdom, Southern Kingdom, how we were born divided, and how the Jewish people emerged out of this journey in many ways. And many of you have been with me on the journey for many of these months already. So you are experts, and we are figuring out together how to make sense of this history and how we can do better and not repeat history as much as possible. So that's my introduction into these days, into this day. I hope this is meeting you as healthy and as well as possible. For those of you who are going to watch the final game of the Mondial tonight, wherever you're rooting for, whichever of the juntas, good luck to everybody. But we got some time to be here together for about an hour. And then afterwards, good. Renee, thank you for working it out. And then we're going to have some time for questions after, unless you're running off to watch the Mondial. Um, thank you, Taylor, for being with us and helping figuring out all the tech issues for us. And I hope clearly also my email and found the right Zoom link, because there was some kind of a snafu. We're going to share our study sheet. And we already began with Don McLean's version of By the Rivers of Babylon, which is a beautiful sing along based on the words of the Psalms. And this is where we're starting with a psalm that was written in Tel Aviv, which was a city in Babylon, of the refugees from the destruction of the first temple of Jerusalem in 586 BCE. And if you open your source sheet, source number 1, Al Neharot Bavel, a lament, a dirge. And I know Boney M created a disco hit out of it, but it's not quite the vibe. By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down and we wept when we remembered Zion. Upon the willows we hung up our lyres, for there our captors demanded of us songs, and our tormentors mirth, saying, "Sing to us one of the songs of Zion." Good if we're all muted. How can we sing the song of Zion, the song of God on foreign soil? So this is the dirge of the refugee, the song of the exile. And it has become very well known, and we sing it often, and it's haunting. We're listening to 2,500-year-old poetry of pain and exile that our ancestors have repeated again and again, even as they came back from Babylon and rebuilt Zion and left again. And all of us are products of many, many diasporas. And yet we ask the question, the pertinent question, how does our DNA hold this trauma? As humans, regardless of our ancestry, Jewish, otherwise, how do we as humans handle the memory of dislocation, of displacement, of the traumas of exile, of diasporas of all sorts, of choices that we often did not make? And so that memory of exile, of galut, politics aside, is part of our human DNA and is definitely part of the Judaic story. And this is the energy that I'm going to invite us to explore tonight, and especially as we understand the complex narratives of the northern and the southern exiles, and how the northern exile, the tragedy, the trauma of Israel, was barely acknowledged and barely known. Yet the one of the south of Judah is very well known. It is a historical choice. So let's go look at a few sources before I open it up for some more thoughts and questions. As always, I invite you to ground yourself in presence, turn off whatever device you don't need right now. Take a moment to feel your feet on the ground. Take a deep breath, or two or three, wherever you are coming from already on this day, on this Sunday. Let's enter this domain of learning and introspection. We're dealing with our ancestral trauma and pain, and we're here to learn how to be part of the solution and healing for our souls and for others as well. Okay. Source number 2. Dr. Christine Hayes writes, the exiles of 722 BCE, which is Samaria, the north, and 586 BCE, Jerusalem, the south, forced a philosophical revolution. Before the destruction, if your nation was conquered, it meant your God was weaker than the enemy's God. The prophets of Israel and Judah inverted this completely. They argued that Babylon and Assyria were merely clubs in Yahweh's hand. In doing so, they decoupled God from geography, paving the way for monotheism that could be worshipped anywhere on earth. See what a big deal this is? So many nations have vanished, and we often talk about that. Babylonians and the Romans, etc., etc. Somehow the Judeans survived. Somehow even the kingdom of Israel survived, although under the radar, by being intercepted by Judah. But the story that survived was the theology that we will survive without sovereignty. We will survive with a book. We'll get to that at the end of the session. And we will survive with the notion that our deity is not geography based. Now, for us today, that might sound obvious, but that was not the case in the ancient world. Where you were is who your God was. The geography was connected to the theology. And if you lost the battle and someone else took over your land, and your sovereignty is gone, and your king is gone, and your people are off the land, your God is finished. Your story is over. This is not what happened here. So bear that in mind. We're going to come back deeper to the implications of how our ancestors dealt with these exiles and how they reframed our history because of it. We're going to move to the next source. And here we're already beginning to look at how the story of both exiles, and we're going to look at both, not in deep detail, but just to get the gist, how we actually don't know that much about the destruction of the people of the North because it simply was not recorded. Dr. Adele Berlin, who's a contemporary scholar, writes, the rhetoric of exile in the Hebrew Bible belongs predominantly to Judah, the South. They're the ones who wrote the Bible. The trauma of Babylon eclipsed the trauma of Assyria because the communities that preserved the texts were Judean. The North was effectively written out of the cosmic drama of redemption, relegated to a historical background note, while Judah's exile became the universal paradigm for Jewish suffering. And one more quote. This is source 4 from Dr. Mark Brettler, another contemporary author. We've used his book, How to Read the Jewish Bible, often in Below the Bible Belt and in this course. Brettler writes, we must remember that the books of Kings are a theological evaluation, not a modern objective history. The editors operated with a deep Judean bias. By viewing all northern kings through the single lens of the sin of Jeroboam, the establishment of rival altars, the text flattens the rich, complex history of Israel, ensuring that its ultimate destruction feels textually justified to the reader. So what Brettler is telling us that not only did the kingdom of Judah that survived past the destruction of Israel rewrite the story to minimize the horror, the trauma of the North, and to obliterate it, in fact, by not writing about it, they also did much to malign the North as the evil pagan idolaters who are not the right Judeans, therefore giving the readers, us, the sense of vindication. They deserved it. The North were the bad guys. When we were destroyed, say the good guys, the Judeans, well, we deserved it too. But we will come back. So I'm bringing this not only so we understand the complexity of our history rewrites itself and how the winners write the book, but to really understand how deep the layers of trauma here. That not only was the South destroyed and Jerusalem went up in flames on the 9th of Av and in the days leading, these days, right now, but there's another destruction in our history that was completely covered up. For those of us who do work in therapy and know what it's like to carry scars of wounds or intergenerational trauma, to deny the level of destruction, to deny a national calamity is such a wounding above the actual wound. So I'm going to come back to this in just a moment. I want to share one more quote with you and then open it up for a few thoughts from you on this before we actually read the text from the Bible about both destruction of the South and North. This is source number 5. We're looking at Dr. Israel Finkelstein, who we've met often, the archaeologist who gave us so much of the access to the information about the North, what archaeology shows us. And he strengthens the points we've just read, The biblical narrative is an ideologically driven history written from the perspective of Jerusalem. The northern kingdom, though vastly more powerful, wealthy, and cosmopolitan than Judah, was systematically demonized by Jerusalem's scribes to justify Josiah's political and religious centralization. Its destruction was framed not as a geopolitical tragedy, but as inevitable divine punishment for its failure to submit to the Davidic line. And just there on the left, you can see Rembrandt's famous depiction of Jeremiah, the last prophet of Jerusalem, lamenting the city's descent in these Rembrandtian colors. So here we are. We're talking about the destruction of Jerusalem, so famous, kept on our calendar, and the Jerusalem of Samaria that most of us don't even know. I grew up learning everything about the 3 weeks and the 9 days, and how Jerusalem fell not once or twice, and how nobody ever paused to say, oh, there was another kingdom, much bigger, and that too was destroyed. No memory. Isn't that odd? So I wouldn't say I'm glad, but I'm honored that we're giving some space to the grief and to the story of our family, the Northern Kingdom, and its destruction as well. So let's take a few minutes for your comments, for your thoughts, for where this is meeting you. Some of you may be well versed with this notion of both destructions, either or none of them. But in the tenor of our course of understanding the Judah-Israel history and what it says to us, I'm curious where it's meeting you. And I see that Ken has his hand up. Good evening, my friend. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you, Rev Amichai, and Erev Tov to you. Thank you so much. So, yeah, I totally take the point of Catherine or Cynthia Hayes about the transportability of spirituality. And I'm wondering what you think about my supposition in light of the subsequent sources that you just brought to us. It seems to me, ironically, that there is a definite geographical bias in terms of inhering the spirituality of the Judean kingdom, anchoring that in people's consciousness. And so the spirituality, because it's based in Yerushalayim, Judea, that is a geographical locus. And it's at the expense, as you rightly say, of the northern spirituality, Ashirot, and all of that. So I'm just wondering, does my contention have any basis here?
What an interesting question, Ken. Thank you. I think what's more radical
Thank you.
is that, again, we're superimposing a lot of concepts on history in ways
Mhm.
that might be more anachronistic than accurate. But the general supposition is that the North, like many peoples in the Near East, assume that the divine is present in many locations
Mhm.
and worshipped in multiple sites. And that gave the geography a much more flexible sense of the sacred. People
Mhm.
worshipped Yahweh in Bethel and up in the north and in different home altars, and the divine was a little more portable. The Jerusalem theology developed with a much more insular, centralized notion that only Jerusalem and only the temple is where God lived. The more the centralization took hold of the people's imagination, the bigger the blow. Because for the northerners, when they were exiled to the reaches of Assyria or moved a couple of miles south Judah, God came with them. God was not
Hmm.
geography based. For the Judeans, the heartache was much more. Because if God is gone, because the temple is gone and God is temple tethered, then now what?
Hmm.
That is the genius of the Babylonian exiles who began reimagining the Judean, or in fact, imagined the Judean story with a divinity who isn't just tethered to Jerusalem, actually, that's mobile. In other words, they re-opted the non-centralized notion of divinity, but is still tied to Jerusalem with a
Hmm.
yearning. And they sort of synthesized the theologies. And the most important thing is the creation of the replacement of the temple. They replaced a building with a book.
Yes. Hmm.
That's the revolution, right?
Yeah.
Jacob Wright, who we've read often, whose book about how the Bible began will be quoted at the end of the session, writes extensively about the fact that the invention of the Bible is genius because while most people suffering destruction are busy trying to rebuild their homes or lick their wounds, our people did that and wrote the book in response. The
Hmm.
book is not central. The book is
Right.
everywhere. So you're right, and this is one of the incredible aftermaths of this national calamity is that we didn't go away. We reimagined what we were.
Yes.
And I think we have that opportunity now again. But that's a longer story. Thank you,
Thank you, my
Ken. Thank you. My friend Renee.
Can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely.
I had a very, I'm using this phone, that's why there's double. Um, I had an insight about Cain and Abel. I suddenly thought about the beginning of the Bible and the stories of siblings divided. And then I thought of Rachel and Leah and Joseph and his brothers and the innumerable stories of family breakage. I hadn't ever put that together before. And it suddenly felt like what was happening so much in the book, our book, on the familial level, on the private level, was now on the communal level. And we're here, we're there today. Our communal divisions are so
100.
great. So
Yeah.
I never thought about moving from the personal to the communal in that way,
Yeah.
but there are so many stories. I
A
just want to
hundred
mention.
percent. 100%. Thank you, Renee. That's a beautiful observation. And I will just say briefly, whoever wrote this book, whoever wrote these stories, the descendants of the southern kingdom of Judah and the northern kingdom of Israel, are writing about Judah and Joseph. They're writing about Rachel and Leah. They're making up the story of Cain and Abel. They're telling us about Isaac and Ishmael, right? They're creating the story of sibling rivalry from the very beginning of the story as a way to echo, mirror, and mold our national history. So this is a family feud, and it's a question of the chicken and the egg, but it's no coincidence that it's Joseph and Judah who are feuding around Joseph's thing. Everything is colored through this understanding of the northern, southern kingdoms of Judah and Israel. Everything, everything you've said, 100%. And it makes us like, wow, it's seeing the Bible with whole new filters and asking the agenda. That's exactly what it is. Thank you for sharing that. Margie, I see your hand up, and Harriet. I'm going to take 2 more minutes. We'll have more time later, just to before we continue deeper. But Margie would like to hear your question or thought.
Um, I think what really struck me was you just were talking about agenda. And When I was young, I was growing up between two worlds of Christianity and Judaism, and for some reason, I ended up going to a pretty strict Christian Bible study school. And so for my fourth, fifth, and sixth grade, we studied the Old Testament, and I really highly remember reading Kings and having these little workbooks where we learned all about the evil Jeroboam and how they were destroyed. And of course, there was always this thread of the importance of David and how the second temple was destroyed because they were still bad. But somehow, the lineage of David came to Jesus, blah, blah, blah. And I'm just kind of blown away by how this story ties into the whole justification of why the Jews were bad. At least as why when I went to Sunday school. Obviously, by the time I was in sixth grade, I couldn't take it anymore and just became a-religious or spiritual or whatever. But what are your thoughts about how the Christian right plays into this whole Jeroboam and the leverage of kings to the extent that they do?
Wow. Margie, that's an amazing story and memory and an echoing of what we're talking about, and a very important political question that I'm going to save for after our session, if that's okay.
Okay.
It's going to take us a little bit off the actual topic, but
Kind of blows, yeah,
but it,
blows me away.
it absolutely does.
Like,
And
why were we reading this book of Kings?
that's our history, and it's complicated as F. Um, thank you. Thank you for bringing that. We'll come back to this. So, folks, with that, I'm going to bring us back into the text. Okay, I'm hearing some of your questions and thoughts. What have we not been told? The horror. I want to simply read with you the two texts that I chose. They're just a tip of the iceberg. Source 6 and source 7 about the destruction of Samaria and Jerusalem. And you've got the link to the sheet. We're not gonna share it on the screen, so you can just follow along. The destruction of Samaria gets very little space in the Book of Kings, and even less in the Book of Chronicles. But here's what we got. In the 9th year of Hoshea, who was the last king of Israel, the king of Assyria captured Samaria, and he carried Israel away to Assyria and placed them in Halah and on the Habor, the river of Gozan, and in the cities of the Medes. Therefore God was very angry with Israel and removed them out of his sight. None was left but the tribe of Judah only. The people of Israel walked in all the sins that Jeroboam did. They did not depart from them until God removed Israel out of his sight. And so Israel was exiled from their own land to Assyria until this day. Boom. Right? The author is writing it for his listeners at some point, either shortly after or maybe before the destruction of Jerusalem by Babylon. The illustration that you're seeing here from the famous black obelisk of Shalmaneser III is from a generation barely prior to the destruction. This is assuming King Yehu was one of the last kings of Israel, and this is the only depiction of an Israelite that we have in world memory. And we're seeing him on his knees, kissing the toes of the Assyrian king. Tells you something. So take a moment to breathe, exhale, feel what it's like to read about the destruction of Shomron, Samaria, kingdom that was around for over 250 years, many kings, many prophets, queens, millions of Israelites, the 10 tribes, vast history. We'll get to the mystery of what happened to the 10 tribes in a moment. there's no question that the sovereignty of the fabled kingdom of Israel was gone very cruelly by the Assyrians. And then comes the more famous story of the very last king of Jerusalem. And for this, we have a date, right? If you notice, there's no real date in the story of Samaria. We have the 9th year. We know that Hoshea was on the throne for 9 years. We don't exactly have a date. But we do for Jerusalem, for the first and second temple. This is the first temple, when 568 BCE, 586, sorry. On the 7th day of the 5th month, we're in the 5th month on the Hebrew calendar now, the month of Av. It was the 19th year of King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon. Nebuzaradan, the chief of the guards, an officer of the king of Babylon, came on Jerusalem. He burnt the house of God, the king's palace, and all the houses of Jerusalem. He burned down the house of every notable person. The remnant of the people that was left in the city, the defectors who had gone over to the king of Babylon, and the remnant of the population were taken into exile by Nebuzaradan, the chief of the guards. The king of Babylon had them struck down and put to death at Riblah in the region of Hamat. Vayagel Yehuda me'al admato. Thus Judah was exiled from its land. There you go. There are more texts that describe this horror, but few are as pithy, as concise, and horrific as these. It leaves so much for the imagination. What don't we know? What didn't happen? What will we never know? But notice the difference in tones, as Margie articulated. Right? Israel is blamed, blamed, blamed. Judah's not, because they're writing about their own blame. And while there'll be plenty of self-blame and moral reckoning and questioning in the book of Lamentations and in other books of the prophets and in even a bit in Chronicles, for the most part, the Bible doesn't stop to say, oh my God, we did this. It blames. And it definitely blames the North for its own demise, and even for the South in some level. So what are we talking about when we're talking about these destructions, these calamities of national scope? We have to understand that we know some but not all, and that regardless of all the facts right now, we're not going to talk about what we know about the North and the South. I'm really interested in the complexity of how the South got to tell the story of both destructions, diminish, minimize, and revile the North. Because that's really the main issue of what we're talking about here. I want to understand how the North was silenced, because the North represents so much of what I feel, perhaps we feel, is the values we want more, while the South is now in charge with supremacy and centralization and nationalization and angry God and vengefulness. And we want to resurface the narratives of the North. So I want to read a text with you, source number 8. It's rather lengthy. It's so good. I've already shared with you previously links to the book that I'm almost done reading by my friend Dr. Amotz Asahel, The Jewish March of Folly. Has anybody picked it up? History geeks? Good. Ruth, go for it. Evelyn, highly recommended, really. I mean, it's not light-time summer reading, but he's a wonderful writer. It's very prolific. He wrote it in Hebrew about 8 years ago and rewrote and edited and wrote the English himself in recent years. and wrote the epilogue that I haven't gotten to yet after October 7th. And so it's really a clarion call for us to prevent the next civil war. I'm going to create a public Zoom with him in the next couple of months to really get deeper into what his message is for us. I think it's critical. But let's read together this particular passage that he writes about really what happens with the destruction. With the North's this is source number 8. Actually, Taylor, do you want to put it share the screen? It'll be good to read it together. I'll begin. With the North's demise and the expulsion of its tribes, lost were not only its polity, population, and identity, but even the very term Israelite. For those who survived Assyria's fury, including the tribes of Benjamin, Levi, and sporadic pockets of other tribes throughout the former north, were now called what all of Israel's iconic heroes, from Moses and Joshua to Samuel and David, had never been called, and indeed never were: Jews, or Judeans. The south, Judah, won. The substitution of Israelite by Jew encapsulates to this day its victory, a grand triumph struck 2 centuries after Rehoboam lost Judah's grip of the north. The civil war that matured with a rift between Judah and Israel, after beginning with Ephraim's assault on the east and with Judah's erasure of Simeon, displacement of Dan, and subjugation of Benjamin, now finally ended with Judah firmly on top. Judah's victory, to be sure, was as complete as it was Pyrrhic. The view was appalling. Had we boarded back then a small airplane at the airstrip by today's Kibbutz Machanaim and flown towards the Jordan River's springs between the Naphtali Mountains and the Golan Heights, we would have seen an endless convoy of deportees snaking north. Some carrying their bundled belongings, others holding children and babies, all trekking towards the unknown through smoldering fields strewn with dead bodies, while hobnailed horsemen whip the elderly, lagging at the column's rear. It was more than just the ugly face of ethnic cleansing, the Assyrian invention for which one historian used the loaded term final solution. For ahead of that caravan loomed a defeated nation's wretched future, and behind it sprawled its fractious past. This grand political fiasco, the refusal to behave like a nation, and the unwillingness to unite even in the face of a common threat, caused the Holocaust of the northern tribes' disappearance and sent the Jewish March of Folly from its founders' reckless politics to their successors' faithful dislocation. Yet, yes, in almost any sense, biblical Israel's downfall cannot be called a Holocaust. Ancient Israel was treated no differently than other nations. Assyria had no special theories concerning the Israelites, and their extinction was not its aim. Even so, in one sense, the North's downfall was a Holocaust nevertheless. Israel was destroyed. The blows it sustained demographically, politically, and psychologically left the people who emerged from biblical Israel's ruins, the Jews, feeling much as American Jewry felt the morning after European Jewry's Holocaust: amputated, decimated, shocked, haunted, guilty, and flooded with longings for a multitude of siblings that had vanished overnight. Had ancient Israel avoided its schisms and placed nation above tribe, Israel might never have died. Its Jewish successors may never have been born, and the Israelite homeland might never have been lost. Moreover, The North's collapse precipitated the South's demise. For the minuscule kingdom into which Israel's remainder now shrunk, Judah, would eventually be even easier prey for its own invaders than the Northerners had been for theirs. Wow. So we can stop sharing for a moment. Thank you, Taylor. Wow, what a text. Yikes. Never mind for now the terminology, final solution, Holocaust, whatever he's doing with that. I know we're at a time where words are played and downplayed, and whatever we use to talk about Gaza, whatever we use to talk about now, just think about this description of this ethnic cleansing of the kingdom of Israel and how it could have been prevented, according to historians, and how rarely are we able to prevent these wars because we're stuck on tribe above nation and selfish interests over the caring of the greater good. So this is one heartbreaking description of what happened to the North, and how the South rewrote the story, including our names, the Judeans. I want to walk us quickly through a few more sources to unpack this, and then we'll have hopefully a few more times for question. The big story is that the 10 tribes of Israel were exiled by Assyria and were lost. We dedicated a chapter to the 12 tribes a few months ago. There's much more to say about it. The big myth of the 10 tribes all over the world, in Afghanistan and North Korea and across the river, etc. But actually, as we already saw, most historians suggest that a big number of the northerners, the Israelites, simply moved to the south. And Christine Hayes writes about that. The biblical writers construct a narrative arc where the 10 tribes of the north simply vanish into the mist of history, creating the myth of the lost 10 tribes. This historical downplaying serves a vital ideological purpose. It leaves Judah as the sole heir to the covenant, transforming a catastrophic fracture of the entire nation into a streamlined story of Judean survival. How convenient. Nobody was left. Not so simple. And in the next text by Dr. Zioni Zevit, in a book I didn't know of before, but I've started reading, the following is written. The religion of the Northern Kingdom was not paganism, as the Judean editors claimed. It was an authentic, ancient variation of Yahwism. By characterizing the North's destruction as a cosmic scrubbing of idolatry, the Deuteronomistic historians, Judah, downplayed the massive cultural and literal loss that occurred when Samaria fell, effectively burying an entire lineage of Israelite thought, but not really able to hide it, because again, the Northerners moved south, and while Judah claimed they weren't there anymore, we were all called Judeans, much of the Israelite lore survives. And much of it is still in our literature and in our liturgy and our mythology today. We'll look at some of it in a moment. Israel Finkelstein, we already met earlier, the archaeologist who's dug up a lot of the proof for why the North mattered as it did, writes this. The disparity between how we remember the two exiles is a product of textual survival. The Northern Kingdom's elites were absorbed into the Assyrian machine or integrated into Judah as refugees, leaving no independent Northern archive to write their own book of return. Judah, surviving a century longer, had the institutional memory and the specific tribal infrastructure in Babylon to actively write its way out of the grave, creating the enduring hope of the return to Zion, but not the return to Samaria. that story was done. One more quote on that from Dr. Tikva Frimerkansky, again, one of the important feminist theologians and writers of Bible in recent times. And she writes, the ultimate downplaying of the North's destruction lies in how the Bible handles the concept of exile. For Judah, exile is a temporary womb out of which a purified remnant will return. For Israel, the destruction is treated as final, terminal, and absolute. The northern voice is never permitted a textually sanctioned lamentation or hope of restoration. It is silenced so that Judah may stand alone before God. Right? So you're getting what I'm talking about again and again, the notion of the grandness of the destruction of Samaria and the north, but its minimization by the authors that we got and how big the pain of Judah was. I want to bring us to how the Bible thinks ahead as we wrap up in just a few minutes. Look at source 13. Dr. Ronald Hendel writes about how memory is crafted in the Bible. And he says, by the time we reach the late exilic prophets, Ezekiel, all the people who lived after the destruction, the historical animosity between Samaria and Jerusalem begins to dissolve into a profound nostalgic yearning for a reunited house of Israel. That brings us to Ezekiel's vision of the two sticks, one for Judah and one for Ephraim, Israel, becoming one in his hand, demonstrating that the trauma of the double exiles ultimately fostered a grander pan-Israelite identity that transcended the old geological borders. And that is amazing, right? Okay, so let's just take a step aside for a moment. I've given this comparison before. It isn't perfect, but here we are in 2026, and there's probably nobody alive to remember in their bones the Civil War of the United States, right? 1865. No one's alive. But children and grandchildren are, some of us perhaps, and the cultural memory is alive. And whether you are calling this the War of Northern Aggression or the Civil War, and whether Lee or Lincoln are your heroes or anybody else, we know that that war was and is told in very different ways. And the project of the United States moving forward past this calamity of leadership and the stain that will take generations to wipe off, there'll be perhaps a way in which the South and North, the red and blue, the liberal and the conservative forge a path forward towards a true United States, but perhaps have never really been united. So putting that huge political question mark aside and going back to our history and saying Babylon, where we began our journey today by the rivers of Babylon, where Ezekiel, a priest no longer functioning in a temple that no longer stands, becomes a prophet. He starts seeing visions of the future. And he talks about Israel and Judah hundreds of years in the battle, but it's already 150 years before Ezekiel is born. And so he begins to romanticize a Judean future where Israel is not erased, but it is integrated with Judah in a more holistic way. It is the closest we have for the acknowledgement of the grand narrative of the North that was repressed, hidden, incorporated by the South. And so I want to read with you just before we end this prophecy of Ezekiel about the two trees and the hope of a future of union. This is source number 14, Ezekiel, chapter 37. I'll read just the English. The word of God came to me. Son of man, take a stick and write on it for Judah and the people of Israel associated with him. Then take another stick and write on it for Joseph, the stick of Ephraim, and all the house of Israel associated with him, and join them one to another into one stick, that they may become one in your hand. Say to them, thus says God, behold, I'm about to take the stick of Joseph in the hand of Ephraim, and the tribes of Israel associated with him, and join him with the stick of Judah, and make them one stick, that they may be one in my hand. And then say to them, thus says God, behold, I will take the people of Israel from the nations among which they have gone. This is Ezekiel talking to the refugees, some of them from Judean stock, some from Israelite stock, all of them now Babylonian refugees. And he says to them, I will take you, the people, from the nations about which you have gone. And one day you will come home. I will gather them from all around. I'll bring you back home to your own land. And you won't be split. I will make them one nation in the land, on the mountains of Israel, and one king will be king over them all. And there shall no longer be two nations, and no longer divided into two kingdoms. One day, friends, one day. Right? We can't understand the power of this prophecy that Ezekiel is talking to the refugees in Babylon without knowing the history that we just read. That there was a northern kingdom with Samaria destroyed and forgotten, but its descendants remembered. And there was a Jerusalem, much more recent paint, that its descendants remembered. And Ezekiel is painting a picture of a future prophecy union that people will be held. Isn't that incredible? I'm not even talking about the fact that here we are in 2026 and I'm in Jerusalem, and that dream of reunion is still animating our journey. We're going to end with a quote from my friend and teacher, Jacob Wright, about the genius of the Bible being written in response to the trauma. Then we have time for questions. Source 15. The true genius of the biblical project is that it is a literature of defeat. While other ancient empires vanished when their capitals were razed and their peoples exiled, the scribes of Israel and Judah did something unprecedented. They institutionalized their geopolitical failure. By constructing a narrative of collective guilt and divine purpose around their destructions, they created a portable identity that could survive without state, temple, or king. And that's how we got the Bible, for better or for worse. And so that, my friends, is the tale of two exiles. Samaria and the kingdom of the north in 722 BCE, of which we have so few remnants. Jerusalem and Judah, 586 BCE, the end of the house of David, and how those exiles were recorded, repressed, remembered, converged, and still alive in our trauma, whether we are aware of it or not. And I am bringing this as a hope to echo Ezekiel that we honor our trauma and our past and do what we can to not take it out on each other and on others, which is what's happening right now in ways I won't get into because my heart's too broken already. So with that, thank you for joining me for this 7th episode of Judaism Born Divided. I hope you are as riveted as I am, and if not, I'll do my best for next time. We have a few sessions next. I'm busy reading all these transcripts and beginning to edit them so that this will be a book at the end. I think it's of extreme importance, and your feedback will be very, very helpful as we trudge along. So let's take a deep breath together. Pause to honor ancestral memories of so much horror and trauma, along with resilience and wisdom, survival. And take a moment to acknowledge that we're here and that with this knowledge comes responsibility to know better, to do better, to be better, to show up as best as we can for each other, and to avoid the sins of the past for the sake of a better future. So be it. So if you need to go, I know there's a game in a minute. Go get them, whether you're for Spain or Argentina. Just the joy of a ball being tossed around. And if you want to stick around for a little bit, I'm happy to answer more questions as we make more sense of these narratives for our lives. Good night. Thank you for your patience. And I'll see you again at our next session in August. Kind, gentle days. Yeah, Harriet and Evelyn.
Okay. I'm really struck by how, as a people, we're totally formed by our different diaspora and the hopes that the diaspora in exile creates. And I wondered if you'd speak a bit. I know there's supposed to be two Mashiach, one from Ephraim and one from Judah. And could you speak a little bit as to what each might textually be seen to offer us as a people?
Happy to talk about the messiahs from what I know. Repeat your first part of the question. I'm not sure I understood.
Well, it seems to me that the concept of Mashiach comes completely from exile and diaspora, and that that's what's formed us as a people repeatedly. And so that's what forms the hope of what happens to counteract the diasporas.
Yeah, got it,
And
got
so
it. Yeah.
I wanted to hear
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, there's much to say about the notion of Mashiach and Messiah. And again, I just came back from a day in the West Bank where the word Mashiach is a graffiti on many, many, many walls and Palestinian homes by very right-wing Jews and settlers who want Messiah, but they want a very particular kind of Messiah, not the one I do or we might. So there's a big distortion, I think, of what Messianic is about. The quick answer is that the Messianic is the horizon of hope. As Lau-Lavie, the philosopher, said, the idea is never for the Messiah to arrive. It's for us to always yearn for the utopia of the future. It's the Messianic consciousness. That's not the way others view it from Lau-Lavie and others. But the Messiah consciousness, the waiting for redemption, was developed in tough times, probably even before the exile, because we're reading it in early Isaiah and in other prophets. But the notion of the anointed one who will save us from the tragedies developed especially in times of diaspora and exile and slavery and being a weak minority with plenty of troubles, and the hope that one day the Redeemer will come and bring us home. It's about that. We are again living at a rare moment in history, time will tell, where people are back on the land. Who would have thought of that 100 years ago, 200 years ago? And who knows where we're going next? So for sure, the notion of the messianic hope is part of a historical tradition of yearning for home, for sovereignty, for power, for release, for relief. And throughout the ages, this mythic imagination developed the concept of two different messiahs. The first is the Messiah of Joseph, the Messiah of the North, and the second following him will be the Messiah of David, the Messiah of the South. And it will be the Messiah of David who will be the one who will be crowned as the king of the world, and all will be one, and kumbaya and hallelujah. And Christianity sits on that messianic notion because that is why Jesus is the house of David and a continuity of David. And to Margie's question before, the way Christianity is taking the Israel Judah story in the north and the south, and blames the Judeans for being the firstborns who are canceled, and celebrates the next generation. It's simply the next phase in the Russian dolls of who replaces whom, right? Judah replaced Israel, and then Christian replaced Judah, and then who knows who's next? It's a replacement theory instead of a both and thing. There's much more to say about the two messiahs. If I'm not mistaken, I am dedicating a session to it. Am I not? One second. I'm a little gaga. But I'm pretty sure that in our curriculum, I think I know it by heart, but I don't. But I'm checking. The Messiah text. Huh. It's probably included in one of the upcoming sessions. But I thought I did. No, thank you. I'm gonna look at it again, because it's definitely very juicy stuff, and I might want to devote more time to it. We might have some bonus sessions as well. So thank you for that, Harriet. Evelyn, and I just want to say, before Evelyn, I'm just seeing there's a few comments in the chat. I don't want to miss them. Dear Eden and Renee, I'm glad the question was answered. My personal inspiration for the recognition of the impact of the split between, I'll come back to that, Roxanne, yes. And from, I don't know what your name is, RP. How prevalent is the history of the lost history of the North in biblical scholarship? Such a good question. I don't know. I think there's just not much. Quite frankly, there isn't a lot of history of the North. It wasn't recorded. We know some, but you can't have scholarship over lacuna. So I think there's very little, quite frankly, unfortunately. Okay. Daniel. Oh, sorry. Evelyn and then Daniel. Yeah.
I have a couple thoughts, and now I'm seeing my face, and it's really hard to talk.
Mhm.
So I better look at you. Um, my first thought is there any way that we can uncover any sources that took place in the Israelite kingdom? Because that would be maybe a way that we can begin to heal in terms of the schism. And then I know this sounds very political, but for me, it's not political. That when I heard the marching into Assyria, I just thought maybe we can use it as a paradigm. I haven't quite worked this through, but the Northern Kingdom being Palestinian story of today and coming together. Those are my two thoughts.
Yeah. You're so sweet. So look, first of all, about the reconstruction of the Northern narrative, what can I say? We ain't got it. It's
So important, I think,
centuries
Rabbi.
ago. It was not recorded. We can
Mm.
imagine it. We can create fiction. We can, do somatic therapy and let our DNA own up what it knows, and let artists do what scholars can't. I still think we can create a reconciliation of the northern and southern divide by telling what we're telling here, even if we don't have the granular facts. There's no need. We know enough. And we know from within the fragments of what we have and between the lines, some of who we were and what we are reimagining. Now, I hear you about the long line of refugees snaking up to Assyria, and why, for some people with a big heart like you, that would evoke empathy for Palestinians on the run or Lebanese on the run. And many humans on the planet right now who are turned into refugees. But I think for others, that will just be like, yeah, well, that was us, and now it's them, and it's revenge, or the cycle goes on. And so may we, all of us, read the narratives of each other's destructions and open our hearts so that others don't have to suffer as well. Take it, pass it on. Thank you. Daniel,
Hello, good to see you.
my brother.
Um, uh, I guess my question is when you mentioned the whole Civil War in the U.S., which was not so long ago in perspective to these histories, it made me think about just these processes of truth and reconciliation that I know happen all too infrequently in the midst of grave civil crises. So I was just wondering what you think might be needed to engage in this many thousand year old process of kind of truth and reconciliation in terms of the schism. Like, is there an opportunity to be doing repair and reconciliation work around this schism that is, as we've been talking about, many parts of it are lost to history. It's tough to dig into the reality of what it was, that we lost fully, but clearly it's so prominent in where we are now. So I'm just wondering, it kind of sparked something when you mentioned the Civil War and think about,
Yeah.
truth and reconciliation in other places that have happened. So
I don't know, but I know that the reason I'm doing this year-long course is to know better.
mhm.
Right? To just begin to ask the question of like, where are we coming from? Like, right? Like for many of you know, as I was reading through the Bible back until last August and like figuring out this Judah Israel story and thinking, wait, why do I not know this? Why do we not know this? This seems really important because today's reality is echoed in our DNA. That goes back to Roxanne's question about when did I, right? If I understood your question, Roxanne, when did this like get sparked? I shared with you all several times, I think, quotes from an article by Avrum Burg, a very prolific Israeli author and politician, and way on the left these days, and anti-Zionist, I believe, by now, if not completely disillusioned by the project. And he wrote a piece about Judah and Israel before October 7th, in June of 23, when the judicial reform sent hundreds of thousands of us to the streets to protest democracy. And he wrote this piece that I can link again. We've quoted it in several study sources throughout these months. He wrote, this is again the battle between Judah and Israel, and this time Israel better win. And that was before October 7th. That was before Gaza. That was before this government of terror managed to stay in power all through its reign. Just dismantled a couple of days ago. We're now gearing for elections here. So I think the truth and reconciliation can begin by us acknowledging that this is our story, that we come from these histories, that there's much to learn about our lesser known days, and that together we can dig this up. And I'm not 100% sure how to do it, right? I'm doing this with you all so I can read out loud and listen out loud and have you do this with me. And by the end of this year, after these 12 sessions, and I've got the transcripts of all these sessions that I'm slowly combing through and editing, we will be able to tell the story. And I've asked before, and I'll ask again if, and some of you offered to be involved in this. This is a project that I invite partners to think of doing with me, because I think truth and reconciliation is critical, and it will come when more of us know the story first, and then we can move on. So, yeah, I will just say I sat with last week. Yeah, last week I sat with a very well-known book editor who is an American and has been living here in Israel for some years and is unable to produce any Israeli fiction. None will be buying it these days in the world. But she's working on nonfiction because there's some room for that. And I told her about what I'm writing. This is just as I wasn't pitching it or anything. And she was like, wait, what? I want to know more. Somebody who's very erudite who knew nothing about this. So there's plenty of room for us to know more towards truth and reconciliation. Um, so thank you, Daniel. And I'm seeing the note to dig up the article of Borg. Damn, I thought I had it somewhere. Because I've taught it. I'll have to find it. I'll make sure to send it send it soon. Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you. Thank you.
Tara.
One of the things, the second part of Azael's book that broke my heart was that he builds the case that this happens over and over in time, just as Israel and Judah in whatever historical context are, is then the predator enters, for another round of murder and dislocation. And in thinking about what you said was, if we can't know the specifics of what our DNA inherited from the North, it still is a warning, a cry out that unless we reconcile, then we become ready for the next slaughter. Yeah, it's a heavy book.
Heavy book. Smart.
But a book that puts that warning sign there. But thank you.
Agreed. And I just sat with the author last week, and he's going to come to. He wants to come to the States, and we'll do some Zooms, and like he wrote it as a warning sign. 100%. Yeah, recommended. Sad recommended, wise reading. Cecile, and then I think we're going to start wrapping up.
It's made me sad that you said that there's no place for fiction for our stories, because the book that I read most recently that touched me really deeply was The Secret Book of Kings by Yochi Brandis.
Yes.
That is some awesome piece of literature.
Awesome. Agreed.
And just mind-boggling. And although we can't actually recover the stories of the North, that was like a pretty good start.
It's a moment. It seems that it's very hard to convince buyers, editors, publishing houses right now to buy fiction out of Israel, even if it's on the left side of things. For some reason, nonfiction is less of an issue. I hope this shifts. We have a lot of repair to do. But thank you for recommending The Secret Book of Kings. I think that too was one of the books that I recommended, and it's definitely on the resource list on the website, on the landing page. So if you all haven't read it and you want to get more of the North, it's a reimagined history of the North, and it's magnificent. So anyway, I'm going to put in the chat. I multitasked a little bit. A few quotes from Avonburg's article and the link for getting it. I'm not sure you'll find it online, quite frankly. Maybe some of you wisely using AI might be able to. It was in Hebrew. In Haaretz, I translated it, but it's only in my archives. So I will try and create a better link that more people can read. I don't think the whole thing was in English on publicly, sadly. Yeah, I'm just putting one more quote in there. So take a moment before you get off tonight to take a look at it and read just the end. And I will try and make sure that it's on the landing page as well. There it is. It's all there. So friends, unless we have any more pending questions, let's take another deep breaths together. We read through some hard stuff as the descendants of trauma and as the ancestors of repair. I hope we are part of the consolation. Thank you for joining me this evening by the rivers of Babylon to sing the songs of hope and heal and move on. I look forward to continuing the journey with you. We'll be back online on August 23rd for our next session. I might tweak it a little bit. It's about Jezebel and Elijah. I care less about Elijah and more about Jezebel, so I might flip it. We'll see. And please don't hesitate to be in touch with questions, thoughts, suggestions. And I'll see all of you very soon. I'll be back in the States late August for a few months. So hopefully some of this in person too. Have a good night, my friends. Taylor, thank you. Viva soccer. Fast gently and take care. Bye-bye.